I'm not here for, homes and Lambos. I'm here for freedom and the freedom that Bitcoin provides me as much as I can possibly get it. And I try to send that message out as much as I can. As a high integrity Bitcoiner, like I try to live my life as close to those ideals as possible. I drive a car that's almost 20 years old and I don't buy many things, and I keep my life pretty simple. The simpler I make my life, the freer I can be. And Bitcoin, because it's not only the best investment in the world, the best asymmetric bet you can make, but it's also a very simple thing to take control of, keep track of, and there's no third-party risk.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Bitcoin Pilot to the podcast. Bitcoin Pilot is a former Marine Corps aviator, staunch Bitcoin evangelist, Bitcoin mentor, and founder and CEO of the Cider Mill Fund. His passion for Bitcoin has transformed his life and the lives of those around him over the last 8 years. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge.
Hey, thanks, Paula. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting with you. Before we get to Bitcoin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I think you heard me talking on a space the other day, and that's kind of where I tend to hang out, is on these Twitter spaces. I think there's a lot of good information in there, and I try to be a voice in there to, some call it toxic Bitcoin maxi. I call it, having high integrity and having high integrity towards Bitcoin. But yeah, for me, I just I found Bitcoin like you were saying about 8 years ago or so. I was lucky. I had a friend of mine who was my mentor. I now work as a Bitcoin mentor with BTC Sessions. I'm part of the team over there, and so I educate people on Bitcoin now. But I think it does, for a lot of people, the experience was, and certainly for me, a lot easier to kind of understand Bitcoin, having a mentor, somebody to throw questions off of, get a little bit deeper into the information. And then when things came up, having somebody to kind of say, like, you need to keep learning, there's more to it. When you have questions, when you start going down the altcoin chains and things like that, to have somebody out there who is a high integrity Bitcoiner to say what's what, and to kind of, give you some signal through the noise. And so for me, I had a good friend of mine, early Bitcoin adopter, 2011 or so. He started really pushing me on Bitcoin in 2015. And we had this plan. I was going to buy some Bitcoin. Unfortunately, he was a little too, I would say, privacy focused back then. So he was like, you need to go buy a computer from somebody in cash. Don't let anybody know you own it. Never let it touch the internet. You're going to download Ubuntu. You're going to use Tor. You're going to use an Onion browser. You're going to roll your own keys, all of these things that now I know and they make sense to me, but back then sounded like a different language, and all sounded very, very sketchy. Because on top of that, he was like, oh yeah, and you need to get $10,000 in cash. You're going to meet my friend at a parking lot in, Central California, and he's going to give you your Bitcoin. And I was like, I'm not doing any of that. That sounds absolutely terrifying. And so that kept me from really buying my first Bitcoin for about 18 months. 18 months later, kind of 2017, the price starts to move. I'm watching it. I'm really paying attention at this point. I buy my first Bitcoin, and then I was kind of off to the races from there. But like I was saying, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I, bought some Ethereum and Litecoin and Bitcoin, and kind of went down that part of my journey. But I would say within the first 6 months to a year, really started to understand why Bitcoin was so special. And then from then have sort of completely drifted over. And now I'm 100% Bitcoin. But it has taught me a lot about not just Bitcoin. As Bitcoiners know, Bitcoin is all encompassing. It teaches you about politics, teaches you about history, it teaches you about technology, economics. All of those things get encompassed. And if you look at my bookshelf now, it's covered in books that range from history of money to religion to philosophy, all centered around this idea of what money is and what Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin sort of solves that problem that we've been trying to solve since really the beginning of civilization and society. So for me, that was my journey, and now, I'm a Bitcoin educator. I love coming on spaces. I love coming on podcasts. I really enjoy one-on-one talking to people individually. finding people that are very excited to learn about Bitcoin. People will say they like the bear market. I think that's nonsense. I like the bull market because you get new people that are interested, want to be educated, want to learn, and are open to it. And you can really kind of have those engaging conversations as they get really interested and start to look harder and harder at this thing. And the older it gets, we're at 16 years now, I think that gets easier to do. It's much more difficult to just dismiss Bitcoin as this magic internet money fad, collectible. They used to say it was like what were those stuffed animals that everybody was collecting back in the 90s?
The Beanie Babies?
Yeah, there you go. Like, digital beanie babies, I think is what they used to call Bitcoin. And now that conversation is kind of gone now. And so, I'm having much more engaging, much more educated conversation with people about what Bitcoin is, why Bitcoin is important. And on top of that, there's just great educational information out there for everybody to point to and look at. And I've been very lucky to be a part of, sort of this mentor team now. And I'll continue to educate as much as I possibly can. And then on top of that, I run a little fund that started with me and my brothers, and it sort of branched out from there. And we've invested in a lot of things, from breweries to weed companies to storage facilities to internet startups. But really, it's become the meme of like you start with a 10% allocation of Bitcoin, it ends up being a 90% allocation. That has very much been the case for my fund. Every time we make a new investment that's not Bitcoin related, which it's been a while now because it is mostly Bitcoin at this point, but I always mark like how much Bitcoin we could have bought with that allocation to these other things. And as time goes by, those other investments become very expensive in terms of the amount of Bitcoin we could have bought with those initial investments versus how much Bitcoin we actually have by allocating simply to Bitcoin. And so because of that, my fund has become mostly Bitcoin, just as I am, mostly Bitcoin. And then on top of that, I've done some leverage and things like that, which we could talk about if you're interested.
So your Bitcoin fund or your Cider Mill fund is, you said 90% Bitcoin, and you offer this to private individuals?
Yeah, so it's we've opened it recently to accredited investors. It used to be just a family fund, but we've opened it up recently to accredited investors. I would love to open up to more people and take smaller amounts. It just becomes a legal issue. You have to start getting different series ratings and different legal structures. Whereas if you're just dealing with accredited investors, the legal hurdle to get in is much lower, and the compliance issues that we have to deal with are much lower in that regard. So Cider Mill Fund has been very successful because it's, like I said, it's mostly Bitcoin at this point. We've had some other interesting places that we've put some money, and recently we've looked at an investment that is sort of Bitcoin related in terms of security, talking about like an entropy play. But again, for me, I think the diversifying away from Bitcoin into other investments is, you have to be incredibly confident that this thing is going to take off, whatever it is you might be investing in. And I think that's going to continue to be the case for a long time. But eventually, I think that it will be sort of Bitcoin related companies or Bitcoin related ideas that we might invest in outside of just buying Bitcoin and holding it, because that strategy for the last 16 years has been the best thing you can possibly do. And I think that's going to continue for a long time.
Do you invest in MicroStrategy, and do you consider that a Bitcoin related company?
Yeah. So my thesis on MicroStrategy is very simple, right? Like, Michael Saylor is sort of the Michael Jordan of acquiring Bitcoin, and he allows me to buy a piece of his company and kind of go along for the ride. If I could do what Michael Saylor does, I wouldn't invest in MicroStrategy. I would just do what he does and buy my own Bitcoin. Unfortunately, I can't borrow billions of dollars at 0%. I don't have any method to do that. If I did, I would do it myself. But Michael Saylor has figured out this incredible machine for acquiring Bitcoin. Essentially, I think of it as like, it's like if your next door neighbor was like the greatest diamond miner in the world, and he was offering you cheap diamonds. Why would I not invest in that? Why would I not, basically buy some of his time, which is essentially the way I look at MicroStrategy. My MicroStrategy sort of journey actually started because I wanted to learn about options. I had to back up a little bit. I've been investing since I was like 17 years old. I, started buying, I think my first stock I ever bought was a company called FactSet, which was an analysis company on Wall Street back in the late 90s. And I've been interested ever since. And when I was in college, I was an intern at a hedge fund. I thought I was going the investment banking route. And I actually worked for a venture capital firm for a little bit after I graduated college, and worked in the venture space before I joined the Marine Corps. So I kind of had, that's my background. And I studied econ when I was in college. So all of these things like led me eventually down this sort of path where I am now, with this kind of 13-year break where I became a Marine Corps officer and pilot that had nothing to do with any of this. But I've always been interested in markets, and I've always been interested in investing and that kind of thing. And because of that, I had a very diversified portfolio, traditional investment portfolio. I traded with margin. I did some day trading back in the day. I've kind of done all of those things, but I had never bought or sold or traded options in any way, shape, or form. And something I would like to kind of maybe share with your audience is I never traded options because I was scared of options. I was worried about getting blown up, and it seemed like gambling to me. And it seemed like an easy way to lose a lot of money. For instance, call options, 85% of all call options end being valueless, right? So I was like, why would anybody play in a game where there's an 85% chance you're going to lose all your money, even if it's a relatively small amount of money? But then I was like, okay, but just like Bitcoin, if you don't play in the game a little bit, then you're never gonna learn. And just like Bitcoin, I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2015, and I started, I learned a little bit, but until I actually could buy Bitcoin, it didn't really start to click. And so I thought the same thing. I had a friend of mine, again, who was been trading options for a couple of years, and he was saying, hey, you just got to kind of get in there and see what you can do. And so in the fall of 2023, I bought a call option, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was literally I had $2,000 in an account, and I just started clicking buttons to see what I could afford for $2,000. That was it. Like I knew about as little as you could know, other than the basic, mechanics of it. And I pressed a couple buttons and bought my first call options on MicroStrategy. And then a few weeks later, after it had gone up a little bit, I bought some more. And then that allowed me to really learn the ins and outs of what options are, how they can be profitable, how you can benefit from them. And especially if you feel like you have asymmetric information, which I felt like I had with Bitcoin, I could take advantage of that over a time period that I felt very confident in. And so after we bottomed in 2022, and then we kind of, went sideways and up a little bit into the fall of 2023, I thought it was a good time to kind of buy some options and see what I could learn. Those worked out incredibly well. I had bought a couple short-term ones, and then I bought a couple that were more than a year out. And now I have a portfolio of MicroStrategy that I can use to keep learning. And so now I've learned covered call strategies. I've learned a little bit about the Greeks. I teach a class on options that is really I'm not really teaching much. Talk a little bit about it for beginners, but then I also bring in people who know this stuff really well. I have a few friends who've traded options professionally for Goldman Sachs and other places like that. And we have guests that come on and we talk about different strategies, way to look at this. And so I've gone from somebody who looked at options and options trading as gambling or, a way to lose a bunch of money, to a place where you can choose where you want to be on the risk curve for making a little bit extra money. And I think MicroStrategy is great in that way because it's something I believe in. I don't really care so much about what Michael Saylor says, or his message. I'm a very simple man. So for me, MicroStrategy has nearly 500,000 Bitcoin at this point, and that's all I really care about. They are the company with the most Bitcoin. That company is going to do well because I know Bitcoin is going to go much, much higher than where it is today. But that being said, learning about how he's doing it, using the ATM, using structured debt, being this massive player in the corporate debt markets, really sort of changing how people acquire Bitcoin and being a model for other companies to do so, gets me to a point where I'm very excited about what's going to happen next. Now we've gone through this bit of a lull in the price, MicroStrategy going up to, I think, 540, 550, somewhere in there. Now traded all the way down to 224 last week. And now we're moving back up to 300. I think it's timing up very well for kind of a mid cycle or end cycle move from now until next September. I have positioned myself with some calls that I bought that I feel very confident about. And, and all that to be said, like that's because of my conviction in Bitcoin. I can make these these plays, or I can make these decisions because of my confidence in Bitcoin. I live in an expensive neighborhood. I live in a cheap place in an expensive neighborhood. But around me, as I walk around, there are lots of $10 million homes near where I live. And so the way that I look at Bitcoin is like there's a for sale sign in front of these houses for 89, I don't know where we're at today, but let's say $90,000. So they're letting me purchase a $10 million home for $90,000 in the Bitcoin market right now. Like this is a $10 million asset. Bitcoin will be worth $10 million in my lifetime. And somebody's going to sell it to me right now for $90,000. That's remarkable, right? And if you don't have access to $90,000, well, they'll let you buy the mailbox for $100, right? Like they'll let you buy a piece of the sidewalk, or the doorknob on the front of the house for $10, $20, $100, whatever it might be, and you can chip away and slowly buy that house and try to get yourself to one Bitcoin. Bitcoiners have had these different marks of like what is a good amount of Bitcoin throughout the time, and I remember when I first got in, it was like, you got to try to get to, I don't know what the number, let's say 50 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin or some ridiculous amount of Bitcoin that is not really possible anymore. And then it was 10 Bitcoin, then it was 6.15 Bitcoin, then it was 3 Bitcoin. Now it seems to be 1 Bitcoin, or even, if you're younger, it's 0.1 Bitcoin. It is hard to articulate to people who haven't really thought about this what 1 Bitcoin is really worth. And not just to say like, oh, it's going to be worth $10 million someday. Yes, it's going to have a very high value when priced in fiat. But the technology itself, the freedom aspect of it, the value that Bitcoin has even today over its counterpart of fiat is really hard to articulate to someone. And so I have friends who were kind of relatively new, but they had enough money to get themselves around 1 Bitcoin or maybe a little bit over 1 Bitcoin. And they're stressed out, right? Because they're like, I don't have enough Bitcoin. And it's just like everybody kind of feels that way. Like, I don't have enough Bitcoin. I don't have enough Bitcoin. I try to tell them, like, you have no idea how valuable 1 Bitcoin is. I did the math the other day. It's hard to figure out exactly how many people have more than 1 Bitcoin, but I think the number is somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million people in the world. If you take the top 1 million people on the planet today and change their net worth into Bitcoin, that means that 1 Bitcoin is the equivalent of somewhere in the neighborhood of about $15 to $25 million today. Owning 1 Bitcoin, you're putting yourself into that sort of stratosphere of people on the planet. I mean, I think there are like 4,000 billionaires, right? And then there's another, the number of decamillionaires is somewhere in that neighborhood of a couple 100,000. So you're really kind of stretching yourself into that unique atmosphere of wealth. And all it is because you figured out this Bitcoin thing a little bit early, and we're still incredibly, incredibly, incredibly early, even if it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So is it your goal to buy a house, a $10 million house one day with your current investments in Bitcoin?
The Bitcoiner in me it's tough being a Bitcoiner and looking at any other thing as something you want to give it up for. I talked about this with a friend of mine. The logical thing, at least again for the next pretty long time, is to rent and buy and keep the Bitcoin. Even if you're renting a place for $15,000-$20,000 a month, the down payment to buy a house that's similar is going to get way outperformed by how much Bitcoin you could have bought. Let's say it's a $10 million home, you got to put down $1 million or whatever it might be. That $1 million that you would have otherwise been able to put down into Bitcoin is gonna way outperform the home that you're buying and the home that you're putting your money into. House is basically just the real inflation metric. So people look at their house and they say, I did these numbers for my dad a while ago because he had a second home that he got rid of, but he was thinking about keeping it, and we were talking about Bitcoin. I did the math for him on property tax, insurance, maintenance. What happens if you don't have a tenant for a month or two? It makes it very clear almost immediately Taylor talks about the fact that you have no carry costs for Bitcoin, right? You can hold Bitcoin for the next 1,000 years and it doesn't cost you anything. You got a transaction fee to get it on chain and to get it off chain, or sorry, to move it on chain. But other than that, you can hold it for 100 years. You can't say that about basically any other asset, and certainly not for real estate. So no, to answer your question, is my plan to buy a home with my Bitcoin investment? Probably not, to be totally honest with you. Even if we go to $100 million a coin, I mean, granted, $100 million a coin, okay, I'll break off, 0.1 Bitcoin to get myself a home. But no, the goal is not. I'm not here for homes and Lambos. I'm here for freedom and the freedom that Bitcoin provides me as much as I can possibly get it, and I try to send that message out as much as I can. And again, as a high integrity Bitcoiner, like I try to live my life as close to those ideals as possible. And so, I drive a car that's almost 20 years old, and I don't buy many things, and I keep my life pretty simple. And with Cider Mill Fund, like we've divested from some of my other investments, not just to move it into Bitcoin, but to simplify the logistics that I have to keep in terms of keeping track of these investments, filing taxes on these investments, getting a K1 every year, those kind of things. I want to make my life both the simpler I make my life, the freer I can be. And Bitcoin, because it's not only the best investment in the world, the best asymmetric bet you can make, but it's also a very simple thing to take control of, keep track of, and there's no third-party risk. And not only is there no third-party risk of somebody, like an exchange or other things when you take control of your Bitcoin, but there's also no third-party risk because there's no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no company of Bitcoin. There's no jurisdiction of Bitcoin. There isn't going to be an announcement tomorrow that the CEO of Bitcoin got a DUI, and now the company's in trouble and they have to reorganize the board. That doesn't exist, right? And so that takes out a ton of risk that you would normally have investing in a stock. Apple was a huge play for mine. And actually, I'll tell this story really quickly. But when Steve Jobs passed away, that was a huge headwind for Apple. And some might say that Apple has never been the same, and probably has not been the same since Steve Jobs passed away. And the company continues to be profitable and the stock continues to go up, but the ethos that was at the heart of that company is dead, and it died with Steve Jobs. Apple's a good example of was something that sort of was the precursor for me when it came to Bitcoin. And so I was in college when I had done a research project, and I had done a research project on Apple, and this was in 2005, I believe. This was before the iPhone. This is post iPod, pre iPhone, and I had done a bunch of research on what was happening with Apple and sort of the move that people were making away from PCs towards Apple, and the number of people that were buying these. And then on top of that, I was in New York City that summer working, and I remember seeing all those white headphones everywhere. I just thought, I was like, man, this is probably going to be a big deal. And there was sort of this rumblings about an iPhone, but I was a broke college kid. I didn't have any money. I couldn't go all in, quote unquote, into Apple. I borrowed a little bit of money, and I was able to buy, some of it, and it did very well. I think it went 100x in the time that I bought it. And over the next 10 or so years, it helped my brother go to architecture school, and it helped me start this. It was part of the seed round for this fund, and also for, but more importantly, just my first sort of Bitcoin purchase. But I remember in 2005, I was like, someday I am going to find something that makes me feel the same way that I felt about Apple in 2005. Someday I'm going to find something that seems like such a no-brainer. And hopefully when that day comes, I will have enough capital to really make a big difference. If I had $100,000 in 2005, that would have completely changed my life, because I would have put all that money into Apple, and I would have, would have turned into $10 million by the time I was in my 30s, and really would have changed things for me. But I knew someday something like that would come again. And so when I did find Bitcoin, I really started to understand it. It became very clear very quickly that this was the thing that I'd been looking for. And the further I learned about it, and the more holes I tried to poke in it, the more it punched back. And I couldn't find an argument that said, no, this is going to fail because X or Y or Z, or there's something better going to come along. And it really did sort of set me up. So, thanks to Apple for kind of priming the pump, if you will, so that when I did find Bitcoin, I recognized this is a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And I needed to not hesitate and not diversify and not try to play it safe, but really go all in. And like I said, it's completely changed my life. And it's helped protect not just me, but my family, my parents, my brothers, my siblings, all have sort of benefited from this conviction that I've been able to get.
That's a really cool story. I definitely can talk to you more about that. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about where you think we are in the Bitcoin cycle and what's
Sure.
going on with the Bitcoin reserve and crypto in the reserve.
Yeah, so this is my third cycle, and I think I would be lying if I said this is exactly where I thought we would be. I thought for sure we were going to 200 or 250,000 last cycle. Couldn't believe we didn't get to 100K. There's a lot of narratives around why that didn't happen, whether it's the China mining ban or the FTXs or the Voyagers or the Celsiuses or the BlockFis of the world. They certainly play their role. But I also think that maybe the world just wasn't ready. And I think we get into these echo chambers and these narrative cycles where it just seems so obvious to me. But then, I challenge people whenever we get to that level. And even now you're starting to hear it again of like, oh, we're going to, 200,000, 400,000, 1.6 million, whatever the number might be. I challenge you to next time you're at a dinner party or an event or even at the bar or wherever and ask people if they own Bitcoin. And it's still almost always no. Like I play golf a bit. I'm usually playing with people I don't know. And I always ask, hey, how old are you? And do you own any Bitcoin? And it's almost always no. And I'm always surprised. The answer, if it is, yeah, kind of. The other answer is like, well, I own some XRP, which I don't know where these people come from. I don't understand how people find XRP or Ethereum or whatever else before they find Bitcoin. I have yet to find a good explanation for that. Something definitely about the fiat system being broken allows for people to find XRP before they find Bitcoin. But, we're, like I said,
Do you think it's a little bit of unit bias? It's too much to buy a Bitcoin.
Yes. I think there's always going to be, I forget who said it, but there's a great quote that's like, there's no such thing as a time machine to become a Bitcoin OG, right? But everybody wants it. And so I think there's a bit of like, well, I missed Bitcoin, so I'm going to buy this other thing and hopefully I can catch up. And from experience, I can tell you that almost never works. And it's only getting harder. In 2017, I think 2017 was the real like last quote unquote alt season. People point at some tokens that pumped in the 21, 22 phase. And certainly there have been like meme coins that have done whatever they've done this cycle. But in 2017, you could throw any altcoin at the wall and outperform Bitcoin over, a course of maybe 6 months to a year. It was so easy to just kind of like, oh, what's this token? Like, oh yeah, no, it went up 5x this week, and people were making silly money in that space on the side. Now, did people actually make that money? No, because they held it, and so they round tripped all the way up and all the way back down. You can look at any chart, put the denominator in Bitcoin, and you'll see the same thing over and over again. This massive spike up, and then just this waterfall down over time. They all look like this. Don't let any altcoiner or shitcoiner tell you differently. They all do the same thing. Oh, it's up, it's up 500x on Bitcoin. It's like, well, first of all, when you started, it had a market cap of like $4, and so nobody could buy it, and so then it went up when it hit an exchange or got on Coinbase or whatever it was, and then it just slowly does this death.
And I think that's because most investors buy high and sell low, right? That is the stats.
Well, yeah, and it's human psychology. I think I'm certainly guilty of it. I know that I can't trust myself when it comes to these kind of things. Like I bought into when I first got Bitcoin in 2017. I was living in San Francisco, and San Francisco was both a great place to be living at the time, but also a dangerous place because you could go to a meetup and you could meet these founders of these coins, at a bar. And so like I met Jed McCaleb in 2017. Jed McCaleb, famously founded Mt. Gox. Sold it off to Mark Karpeles, and then was part of the XRP team before he founded Stellar, and then he moved on. And I don't even know what he's doing now, but the guy, maybe one of the most successful crypto dudes. Guy's got $2 billion now or something like that. But this is before I knew, that everyone was full of shit. Excuse my language. But and so I met him at a bar, and it was a stellar event, and there were a couple other guys there, very successful. Another guy who was a friend of mine who now works at Swan, or did work at Swan. We were all there, so it all seemed, it all comes with this veneer of professionalism and success, and what have you. And so I met Jed, and I think the week before, Stellar had gone up, had doubled like in a week, and I had missed it. I had been paying attention to Stellar, but I had not bought yet. And I met Jed, and I was like, man, I just missed that pump last week. What do you think comes next? And he said something ridiculous, like the Central Bank of Malaysia is about to announce that Stellar is going to be their new token that they're using to launch their dollar equivalent this week. And I was like, oh man, okay, awesome. Like, I'm gonna get it. So I bought some Stellar. It went absolutely nuts for 2 months. I think I bought it at like 4 cents, and it went to $1 within a month. Like I said, I wasn't smart, and I couldn't help myself. And I was like, oh, we're at $1, we're going to $10. Like, it's going to the moon. And then I round tripped the whole thing all the way back over the next year or two, because I didn't know what I know now, and didn't realize. But it was a great lesson for me, and not a particularly painful one, because I ended up, I think I ended up about even with my investment in Bitcoin price. So like I think I put in whatever, I maybe got like a 10% increase over the time. Had I been really smart, I'd be the Michael Saylor of Bitcoin right now, with a big old stack of Bitcoin. Had I just stolen my Stellar back into Bitcoin. But micropsychology is really difficult, and I was definitely part of it. I think you mentioned Unibias. I think I own something like 2.5 million Stellar tokens at one point. Which sounds great, right? Except that it doesn't matter if it's worth absolutely nothing. You can dig a lot of holes in the desert, but nobody wants your holes. Who cares, right? And so that was a powerful lesson for me. And I am sympathetic to people who are getting into this stuff now, because that unibias of Bitcoin being worth 90,000 seems like, well, I missed the boat, and it's too late for me. And what I say to the too late crowd is, do you know what the first so in Sumerian times, when we invented cuneiform writing, do you know what the first thing we did with written word with cuneiform was? Like, what was the purpose of cuneiform when we first created it? So the first history that we have, the first thing that we wrote down as a culture, as a society, was a ledger. It was a wages ledger. It was basically saying, like, who owes what money to who. That's the first record we have in the quote unquote human fossil record of our written society. And so that's how important money is, basically. It's so important that we literally invented writing to create money, to make a money that would be to be able to be kept on a ledger, and a little bit more formal than barter and the trading system. So that being said, that was about 6,500 years ago. So we have this history of trying to find the perfect money that's 6,500 years old. And we've tried all different kinds of things, whether it's rhinestones or gold or agri beads, all the way up to the Medici family in 1497 invents double entry bookkeeping, changes the whole world, launches the Italian Revolution, or the Italian Renaissance. We get this massive uptick in global cooperation through double entry bookkeeping. And now, in 2009, while you and me just happen to be alive on this planet, we invent virtual entry bookkeeping, or triple entry bookkeeping, whatever you want to call it. And we've perfected money. And I don't think there's going to be a more perfect money than Bitcoin. It's not just better money, it's perfected money. And so if you think you're late because 16 years have gone by since perfect money was created, I think that if I think, Bitcoin is going to last 10,000 years. So cuneiform was invented 6,500 years ago to make money, or to create a ledger for money. Here we are 16 years into this new system. If you think you're late, you're wrong. Even getting a small fraction of a Bitcoin will completely change your life. It will change the lives of the people around you. You may have to wait a little longer, right? I think that the days of buying Bitcoin at $1 and waiting until it gets to $1,000 are gone. We're not going to have 100x in a year, or in 2 years or 3 years, whatever. But I do think there's still at least 10x, 100x, maybe even 1,000x in our lifetimes, And that's just the selling point to get people in the door. And then they can start learning about, why is Bitcoin perfect money? Why is it important that we adopt this? And why is it better than all these other tokens? And I have yet to perfect my pitch of like, stay away from this stuff and buy this and only go Bitcoin. But I think as Bitcoiners, high integrity Bitcoiners, I just try to live as high integrity Bitcoiner as I can. And then people can maybe look at my life and say, Bitcoin Pilot seems to be doing well. What is he doing differently? Or what is it about this Bitcoin thing? Be the change that you want to see in the world. So I try to live as close to those ideals as possible by being a dedicated Bitcoiner. And I think that is my best way to educate people around me and educate those that are interested in getting into this space. Does it work? I don't know. There's a lot of people out there that have great marketing. Obviously, we've got the Brad Garlinghouses and the Winklevosses and the Brian Armstrongs of the world who are going to be sitting in that room with Donald Trump on Friday. I don't know if all those people are going to be there, but you understand my point. Like, there's a lot of money in those things. There's not a lot of money for normal people to make in those, but there is a lot of money that has been built into these very powerful sort of packs. And unfortunately, I think that the crypto system is really just an extension of the fiat system, and it's still a very strong system that we have yet to defeat, if you will. But I know that over a long enough period of time, Bitcoin will continue to grow, continue to be the thing that's going to be the positive change in the world. And anybody who gives up their integrity and gives up their value and their time for these altcoins is going to be not punished, but essentially going to greatly underperform those who simply buy Bitcoin and hold it and live their lives, stack as much Bitcoin as they can, turn in your savings vehicle, learn what you can, take custody of it. And when you have questions, reach out, because there's lots of people like me who are out here, who want to educate, who want to tell people, who want to spread the word, because it's important. And it's to me, it's the most important thing. And it really, and that gets more into the philosophical portion of Bitcoin, the political portion of Bitcoin. And it's something that people say, thank God for Bitcoin. I think they say that because without it, I don't know how I would have an optimistic viewpoint of what the world's going to become. But because Bitcoin exists, I have a very optimistic view of the future and where we're headed. And on top of that, it gives me the peace of mind to ignore 99% of the news that's out there. I just see a world in which if we simply adopted Bitcoin, all of these conversations that we're having around politics or right, left, blue, red, center, purple, whatever it might be, none of that stuff matters until we fix the money. And so you have to adopt Bitcoin, fix the money, and then that addresses so many of these other issues that we think we need to argue about. I'll leave it there, but that's sort of the crux of why I'm so passionate, is because there is this world I want to see, and it only can be built once Bitcoin is really truly adopted.
Yeah, and that's true for many of us, right? We come for number go up, and then we start to go down the rabbit hole and realize that this can change the world. It does give us more hope because it is an honest ledger and an honest system.
Absolutely.
Whereas the current fiat system is not only stealing from people via inflation, but also everybody all over the world that's further from the money printer. So, yeah, that's why we're getting the word out.
That's
but
right.
Before we go deep into those woods, where do you think we are in this cycle with Bitcoin? Do you think this could be the top, or are we just getting started?
I mean, I think when we hit 108, I've said this to everybody who would listen. I was like, this could definitely be the top, but there's also no way it's the top. So I think we got a long way to go. I think we're in a very sort of weird mid-cycle sideways movement right now. But there's just no way that we don't go higher, and I think considerably higher. I really think I'm in the voice of like, we're going to the couple hundreds of thousands. $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, I think is a very reasonable top. I mean, if you go back to 2017, from where we were a couple weeks ago to the cycle top, you're looking at 1.6 million would be the top from where we're at, which seems insane. But even people who were back in 2017, nobody was thinking we were going to go to $17,000, $20,000 in the beginning of that year. Going over 1,000 was exciting, and maybe we were going to get a couple hundred. Maybe 2,000 or 3,000. Now it's a much smaller market cap. We're now a $2 trillion asset. Very difficult to move that kind of money into Bitcoin. So do I think we're going to 1.6 million? No. Do I think Samson Mao screaming God candles and Omega candles is a little bit ridiculous? Absolutely. Do I think that there is a real possibility that we're all living in a simulation, and 69K last top and 420K this top it makes sense to me? Absolutely. So my prediction, I think we're going to be $200,000 to $300,000 by the end of the year, probably by the end of the summer or early fall, because there's too much good news out there. I don't think that we are going to get the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve the way that we want it to be, but we don't need it. And to be totally honest, I don't, as a high integrity Bitcoiner, I don't particularly want that world. What I really want is the continuation of an adoption of a voluntary system. Bitcoin is not forced on anybody. It is a voluntary adoption of a better money. And that's it. And I like having that conversation with people who are new, because when they're like, well, it's not so much anymore, but it used to be, Bitcoin's for criminals, and it's evil, and it's going to cause issues for government and all that stuff. And I'm like, that's fine. Then you don't have to adopt it. But just realize that there are millions of people around the world who have chosen, simply that's it, have chosen Bitcoin because it's a better money. That's it. It's just a voluntary system. And everybody who gets involved with it is here for a voluntary reason. From the very early days of Hal Finney being the first person getting a Bitcoin transaction through today, where you have multi-billion-dollar market cap publicly traded companies buying Bitcoin, and you have nation states trying to put Bitcoin on their reserve, and you have nation states mining Bitcoin, and being in sort of this global hash rate, not necessarily a war, but a global hash rate race, I'll say, where the game it's game theory, and it starts at the individual level and it goes from there. And so at the individual level, it's a race. Like you and me are in a race to acquire as much Bitcoin as we can. The more Bitcoin you can acquire, the more protected you'll be, the more freedom you'll have. But I like to say that Bitcoin is like this infinite train leaving the station. Like you can always catch the train. Now, if you get on a little bit earlier, you can get to your destination a little bit faster, but you will always benefit from getting onto this Bitcoin train, and nothing stops it, and it will continue forever and ever and ever. And not only will it benefit those who get on it, but it's going to start to benefit society as a whole. And maybe we're seeing the early stage of that either in Bhutan or in El Salvador, where you're really seeing sort of positive influences. There's a lot going on in El Salvador, and I don't want to say that everything is happening because they're adopting Bitcoin, but certainly the adoption of Bitcoin is having a positive impact on these places that are doing it. And these are happening all over the world. There are these tiny little Bitcoin circular economies popping up, whether it's in Costa Rica, El Salvador. I know there's a few in Italy now. There's a couple in Africa. You have one in the Philippines. So they're starting to pop up. And have you had a chance to go to any of these places? Have you been to El Salvador yet, or done any of that travel?
No.
So I just went. I was down there for the Bitcoin Plan B conference. It was my first time down there. And man, what an experience as a Bitcoiner to go down there and use Lightning. There's a lot of FUD out there about Lightning, but I used it for over a week straight, bought, food, pupusas, beer, surf lessons, hotels, everything that I purchased for the most part, I was able to purchase with Lightning and with Bitcoin. And I barely speak any Spanish, and there wasn't a ton of English being spoken down there, but it was still very simple. They pull out the app. I say, hey, Bitcoin. They pull out a QR code. I press it. Off we go. Deal done. And that was it. And it was just a really lovely experience. And I can't wait for that to be the case everywhere that I go.
So do you try to use Bitcoin as often as possible to improve the network and support the network?
Well, I do, and also because I'm 100% adopted. People are like, oh, why would you spend Bitcoin? Well, everything is Bitcoin to me. Even if I have dollars that I haven't bought Bitcoin with, like to me, that is still, it's just unbought Bitcoin. Even dollars are unbought Bitcoin. It's like, I get in these spaces and I hear people like Gary Cardone be like, why would I spend Bitcoin? Why would I spend Bitcoin? And my answer is like, well, you're underallocated to Bitcoin if you're asking that question. I personally am about 130% Bitcoin. So I've taken loans against my Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin. I've got some MSTR. I've got a little bit of cash to pay rent and service the interest rates on my loans. But other than that, it's all Bitcoin to me. And so I don't have any problem spending Bitcoin. I spend it as often as I can. With friends who will accept Bitcoin for certain things. I live in a place where there's a pretty good Bitcoin community. And so I do try to spend sats as often as I can. Going down to El Salvador was a really great experience, spending sats down there. And, there's been sort of this conversation of like, what do you want to see more, a Bitcoin strategic reserve or a change in the capital gains laws? And like, to me, it is a no brainer. If they would change the capital gains laws, whether that means no capital gains at all on Bitcoin or any other crypto, or if it means under a certain threshold, we don't have to worry about it. I trying to take track of every single Bitcoin purchase I made and reporting the capital gains on that based on when I buy. I mean, I've bought Bitcoin over 1,000 times in my lifetime now. So like, which Bitcoin are we talking about? And then I've quote unquote sold Bitcoin to buy things a bunch of times. And it's like figuring out the buying cost and then the sell cost, and it's for $6, because I bought a beer. Like it's a ridiculous onerous system put onto citizens that is ridiculous. And if any politician actually looked into it, they would say this is outrageous. We need to change this because we're making our citizens' lives more difficult. They don't care, obviously. So we need to be that voice. And it does sound like there is some bit of a voice. I just hope that it's the right voices that are getting to the right ears. Sometimes I don't have the faith that that is the case, but I also don't have to care because I have Bitcoin. And so I know in the end, like, Bitcoin's going to win. And so I don't worry myself too much about it, but it would be really nice to have a truly pro Bitcoin stance from our government to really allow us to use it in a way that's much more friendly than the sort of, I just want a system that's not antagonistic. How about that? You don't need to hold my hand. You don't need to buy my bags. You don't need to, create a strategic reserve. Just don't be antagonistic. And we are starting to see that. The end of Choke Point 2.0, I think, has been big. Certainly the conversation has changed a lot around Bitcoin in the political sphere. But I really just want a system that's not antagonistic to me as a citizen, but also, I was a former service member, so it's like I'm a veteran, I'm a citizen. I just want my government not to hate me and not hate the way that I choose to live my life. And the way that would happen would be if they, started having truly pro Bitcoin legislation that just leaves me alone. That's really what I want. I just want to be left alone.
Yeah, that's true freedom, and that's what this country's about. So
it was, hopefully, someday.
Yeah. Well, with Bitcoin, we have more.
Right. With Bitcoin, I have a way to opt out. So
Yeah.
that's what that's what I try to preach to people as much as I can. I think that it's a message, and getting to interact with it. I had an interesting time teaching Gladiator from Twitter about Bitcoin, and I got to sit down with his family, and they were more about MSTR, and they bought some ETFs, and they sort of understood Bitcoin as like this incredible store of value. And it's always interesting to me the way that people come to Bitcoin. Some people come to it from just a pure investment standpoint. They don't take the time to learn technology or why it's quote unquote freedom money. But I get to sit down with them and show them how to take custody of Bitcoin and how to send Bitcoin that's self-custodied, and watching the epiphanies and the light bulbs of like, oh, wait, this isn't just Venmo. This isn't just, a Cash App, like sending money around. You just transferred $100 worth of value to me. I didn't have to give anybody my social security number or my name or even an email address or anything. All I did was, pull this random string of code out of the network to determine my seed phrase. And then from there, that's all I needed. And now you can send me Bitcoin and I can send Bitcoin, and nobody knew it was me. Nobody, I could have sent $100 or I could have sent $100 billion, and there's no difference to the network. And having those conversations and watching people sort of wake up to the fact that this is so much more than just a great investment or a great store of value, and understanding why that technology is so important. And then you start putting into historical context of people who were oppressed, or people who have escaped from a dictatorship, or people who have escaped from a living situation, all the way to escaping from a domestic issue where you used to not be able to take your value with you. Now, if you can memorize 12 words, you can travel the world with your entire net worth in your head, and nobody can stop you. Nobody can take that from you. Implications of that on the surface may seem sort of like, oh, that's interesting. But the more you think about it, the more you recognize how life-changing that is and how life-changing that can be.
And it's true ownership, right? Whereas when we have Bitcoin, it's true ownership, especially in self-custody. Whereas if you're sending Venmo, we don't really own that.
No.
I did want to ask you about your work with Bitcoin Mentor. That's a little bit about what you're explaining. Is there any more you want to share on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I started working with, I don't know, BTC Sessions. Ben is a great educator, and he has a team of a few mentors that have sort of joined the company and the label of Bitcoin Mentor. I started working with them this year. It's really just more professionalizing and solidifying something that I already have been doing on my own. I've educated a lot of people around self-custody. And so it's high integrity Bitcoiners that will educate you anywhere from, buying your first Bitcoin to taking self-custody to creating multi-sig solutions to running your own node to setting up a Lightning network. And we'll go anywhere you want to learn on that spectrum. We will help you go from zero all the way out to being a self-sovereign Bitcoiner who can travel the world with your Bitcoin and run your own node and call your own server, all that. And so it's a great group of people who work this, all very knowledgeable, and all of us come from different backgrounds. Some are very technologically savvy. Some come from more of an educational background. It's a great experience for me. And, if any of your listeners are interested, they can find me on Twitter and they can find my page. And on there, you can book a 15-minute free session. We'll talk about what you're trying to do. I think people are all on the different levels of their journey. And I just like helping people go get a little bit further down that road and help them do it right and not make the same mistakes that maybe I made or other people make when they are trying to take custody, and make that experience a little less scary. Because I do know that feeling of like, truly, we call it radical responsibility, right? Like taking custody of Bitcoin and Bitcoin in general is true radical responsibility in a way that almost nothing else is, right? There's nobody's gonna save you essentially if you forget your seed phrase or you store it incorrectly, all of that. That being said, it doesn't have to be that scary. It's not that difficult. It's not that hard. We, as Bitcoiners, we're on this sort of fine balance of like, not your keys, not your coin. You got to take custody, but then in the same breath, like I just said, it's radical responsibility, and you're screwed if you lose. If you screw it up, like you're going to lose all your money. That's a scary sort of conversation. But that's why I like doing this mentor thing, because I get to sit with somebody for a couple hours and really talk through it and get you very comfortable and realize that it's not scary, but it does take your attention. It does take time. It takes practicing with these things a few times to really understand it. And then, and then we're always here when you have questions, because questions always come up, and not everybody has a good friend who's a Bitcoiner that they can call. And so the way I look at it is like, I become your friend. I become your close confidant that you can reach out to when you have these questions, and it doesn't have to be so scary, so that you make sure that, you're picking the right hardware, you're picking the right software, you're doing the right thing, you're learning it the right way. And so you're jumping in the deep end, but you're sort of being helped into the deep end instead of just jumping off a diving board and hoping you do it correctly. And because I've had experiences of friends losing Bitcoin, I take that responsibility very seriously.
Yeah, that's a wonderful service. And I mean, even I've seen some of the things you offer up to UTXO management and more advanced stuff. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Most of mine is in self-custody. It can be spread all over the world, but some in ETF, because I thought I might buy a home one day, a bigger home. But after speaking to you, I think no. but
Keep renting.
There's another reason, because okay, there is that slight still fear that, okay, if I did lose my self-custody, I'd have that there. Do you find some people are like that? I much prefer the freedom aspect, but I have some in an ETF.
For sure. And I'm not like, as much as I am an evangelist for Bitcoin and an evangelist for self-sovereignty and taking custody of your Bitcoin, I also recognize that there are trade-offs with that. And so I'm not one of these people who would say you need to buy Bitcoin and get it in self-custody as quickly as possible, because that is a recipe for you not being ready to truly take that responsibility. And we are in a place now where I still don't think keeping Bitcoin on an exchange is a good idea, but it's much less risky today with a lot of these exchanges than it was in the Mt. Gox days, or even with the Celsiuses and the Voyagers and the Three Arrows Capital fiasco that we went through last cycle. People give Coinbase a lot of crap, but the truth is Coinbase has been operating since 2012, and they have yet to lose anybody's Bitcoin. Now, that's a bit of a survivor bias. Coinbase could have easily gone out of business anytime there and lost all your coin. And there are lots of companies that did do exactly that. And so we're looking back with 2020 vision and saying, oh, well, you could have just kept with Coinbase since 2012 and you'd be fine. I mean, yeah, that's because Coinbase is still here today, but that wouldn't have been the case for Bittrex. It wouldn't have been the case for, like I said, these Celsius and Voyagers, and there was another exchange. Exchanges blowing up is a trope for a reason. So yes, I do think that it's important, if you are going to take self-custody, to find somebody who can walk you through that. Now, whether that you hire somebody like me through Bitcoin Mentor, or you have somebody that you trust and really knows what they're talking about that's in your circle, those are two different things. But there are now solutions out there that are becoming more robust, that is sort of a hybrid model, whether that's through a company like Unchained, where you have a multi-sig wallet that you're kind of keeping a couple of the keys and they keep a key. Or they have a full custodial multi-sig, institutional multi-sig solution. OnRamp has that as well. Unchained is offering it now. And so these other ways to store your Bitcoin that are not exactly your keys, your coin, but are sort of a hybrid model that also offers benefits that you can't really offer for yourself. And I understand that there are people that want to do that. And yeah, and for the ETFs, like, I'm glad that ETFs exist, because I do think there's definitely a segment of the population that will never take self-custody of their Bitcoin. Somebody, especially like in my parents' generation or the boomer generation, where, they're used to having a financial advisor that they pay 1% a year, 1.5% a year. Now you can take that same person, you can go to OnRamp, they'll charge you 0.5% a year, and they will white glove your Bitcoin into custody for you. And, a few things there. Obviously, it's not your coin, but it's stored multi-sig institutional, and it's geographically separated around the world. It's a nice option for a lot of people. And on top of that, you're protecting yourself from the $5 wrench attack. If you have it in an on-ramp type situation, yeah, you're not custodying it, so it's not quote unquote your Bitcoin. But it also means that somebody can't come into your house and hold you at gunpoint and say, give me your Bitcoin. You say, I don't have access to it. I can't do that. And for a lot of people, that's a very understandable, good position to be in. I'm in that position. I don't have access to my Bitcoin, but self-custody, but I couldn't give you, if you came into my house right now and asked me for my Bitcoin, I don't have access to it. I would have to, I have ways. I'm not going to obviously go into the details, but I have no access to the majority of my Bitcoin. And that's on purpose. It would take me a very long time to get it. And again, that is on purpose. And so, yes, there are ways to do it self-custody, but it's important to also, especially if you have enough Bitcoin that it's concerning for you, to separate yourself from access to your Bitcoin.
Yeah, very, very good points. Well, I can't believe we're already at an hour. I didn't get to half the questions.
I know. We did the whole crux of this thing. We'll have to argue about Lowry and software next time.
Exactly. We'll chat in a couple months and go into all that. But thank you so much for joining me. I will post links to your accounts below.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, this is great. I love talking Bitcoin. So, it's what I would have been done anyway today. So
thank you.
Cheers. Have a good one.